then they looked up, and they became conscious of a changed rhythm in all the multitudes around them, and it was sort of a spontaneous mass halt. And immediately they saw what it was that made everybody stop. Ahead of them, a short distance, was a column of fire. What it was, they had never seen. It towered steady and solid, and there was no flame like any other. It was like an illumination that glowed but never flamed. It brightened the countryside, but never grew more nor less. What is that? What is it that's shining like that? They marched ahead towards the fiery column to find Moses, and they stopped. The many-colored lights were moving along with this vertical beam. Moses, Moses! Aaron gasped. What is that? The pillar of fire that will always be in front of us at night. It is the sign of the presence. In the daytime, it will be a cloud. Go tell the people not to be afraid. With the fiery sign, the people marched all night and camped the next day, far from the city where they had come. The next morning, back in the city where they had come from, Pharaoh woke up and looked out the window to the city that he had known for so long, the city with new and fine and towers and parks and streets which the Hebrews had built for him and his father before him. He had a strange feeling of newness, as if he hadn't seen these things, these sights, in a long time. And if he had awakened among familiar surroundings after a long, terrible dream. Then he noticed something, that no work was going on around the half-finished public building near the palace grounds. So he called the servant right away and asked about it. The servant didn't know and went to find out. Word came back. The whole host of Israelites were seen marching out, driving their flocks and herds 2 days ago, and nobody's heard from them since. The Pharaoh realized what had happened and became alarmed. Do you suppose the Hebrews have gone away? A lot of people are saying that same thing, and they want their work done and aren't getting a bit of it done today. And his court people started to respond. Why should we let them stop looking for us and go off like that? One of them said. It's a sin and a shame when you come to think about it. Them Hebrews off doing nothing and our work not getting done? It's worse than that, one of the others agreed. And they can be stopped, you know. They can't be far by now, and them on foot too. Give me my war chariots, the Pharaoh shouted. And then, with a kill-mad cry, the 600 chariots with the Pharaoh in the lead thundered out of the city before a cloud and the road dust and raced down the road to the way off. Pretty soon, the Israelites saw them coming. Pharaoh, the Egyptians, they're coming down behind us, chariots, shouted Joshua. The women screamed in open-mouthed terror, and the men cried out. Some tried to run away in the woods and hide, and others just stood or squatted on the ground in dumb fear. When they saw Moses coming along, they crowded about him, and they started to voice their concern. I always told my husband not to bother with this mess, one woman sobbed. I tried to tell him he was getting along all right under these Egyptians, but he was so hard-headed, he had to get so mixed up into it. And the voices broke out everywhere, and all spread out in fear. And the war chariots of the Pharaoh were heard in plain view, and they saw them in the distance. Couldn't that man find graves enough in Egypt to bury us all there without dragging us out here in the wilderness to die? Didn't I say that all along this time, that Moses was some fake prophet that God he made up? He was in his own head? Didn't I always tell you that those Egyptians was nice people to work for? You couldn't have better boss men than them. I hadn't thought of that, none, but, oh, sorry, wrong page. The idea of coming and fooling people off home and heaving and on and on and on. I don't know what the Pharaoh, I'm just going to tell him how it is. Didn't I always say that we was better off in slavery than we would be wandering all over the wilderness after some stray man and somebody nobody will tell anybody about? Tell the truth. Didn't I tell you that? And everyone was expressing their doubts. Everybody. You heard me in the meeting distinctly. I said it, didn't you hear me? Who asked him to butt in no-how? Our business didn't concern him, did it? It was our backs that he was beating. It was none of his, and if he shouldn't have done anything. But Moses reached the rear of the great huddle, and in trembling, and in humanity, he took his stand between the danger and the people who were his charges. Again, he was one against all of Egypt. As the chariots drew near and the panic in Israel grew and grew, Moses spoke to them and said, "Stand still, every last one of you, and stop screaming and yelling. You haven't got a thing to be scared of. That ain't nobody but Pharaoh and his arm, and we done beat them too many times before. Don't get so excited about nothing. The Lord is going to fight for you just like the Lord has done all along. Stand still and see the salvation of the Lord, which God is going to show to you today." See those Egyptians there? Take a good look at them. Because those Egyptians that you're looking at, you aren't going to see them no more as long as you live. And nobody's going to be seeing them either. Stand still and keep quiet is all I ask you to do. Moses didn't lift his hand while he spoke, but the command in his voice was calming, and suddenly everyone felt secure and brave. Moses just stood and looked at the pillar in the cloud that went before the host, and as the cloud then covered the Israelites, they felt shut in and safe. The Egyptians, not being able to see them, felt shut out and confused. They made camp and went to sleep, but Moses didn't sleep. They waited until the morning when the tide was low and the people walked across the sea. Moses raised up his hand and the tide waters backed down. When they got to the other side, every last one of them, Moses turned around and watched as the Pharaoh and all of the men that he had with them, with their chariots and their horses, as fancy chariots as you could see, they came. And they came down the beach, and he saw them hesitate and debate whether they could make this crossing. And they started off, the 600 chariots, into the sea. Well, pretty soon, they got to the middle, where the sandy, rocky shores were gone, and the horses started to trip and fall in the clay. And the chariots started to twist and turn and tumble over each other. And then Moses lifted his hands, and the gripping east wind that had been holding back the waters let them loose. They came rushing back to its bed. And there was the Red Sea, once again with its two shores, Egypt on one side, and the people of Israel on the other, having crossed over. Moses just stood and looked at the sea for a long time. Behind him, he heard the people exulting. "Didn't we outdo old Pharaoh, though?" Miriam was asking everybody. "It was a great victory for our God." Aaron was saying, "We showed old Pharaoh something. Yeah, he's dead out there in the ocean, and there ain't no help for it. That's one old Pharaoh, won't have no great big tombstone over him. Well, he's got the great big sea over him, and I reckon that's big enough to suit anybody." And they made a song out of it and danced it off. Miriam picked up her cymbals and played. "Old Pharaoh's dead. How did he die? Old